Okay, I realize it's been longer than usual for the release of another episode, so I put up episodes 9 and 10. But I've been very busy on this and I've accomplished a lot. And before we really get started in talking about some of these things, I've got a little clip here. I want to show you the staging yard. The track is all down and finished. And there's a number of other things I've done. I've been very busy. I built the other end of the staging yard. I'll talk about that in a minute. And then laid all the body tracks that you can see here. But let's go look at the grand tour, and then we'll come back and talk about how I put this all together and where we're going to go from here, because now we're going to start getting into issues of wiring and digital command control, and that's going to be a real learning experience for me. So let's take a little tour of the staging yard, and then I'll be back. Okay, here is an all-around tour of the staging yard, walking around the perimeter of it, realizing it's not a straight staging yard. And you'll notice that I've already broken out some of my freight cars that I've accumulated over the years, more than I would, really imagined I'd ever collect. But these are all cars that I built when I was TDY somewhere, or just occupying time on government travel in the evening, instead of going out to bars, sit in a hotel and build railroad cars. And this is the length of the staging yard. You'll notice these black and red bits of straw sticking up, and I'll explain those later. I'm just giving you an overview here, and you can see that I'm already working on doing some of the wiring, and that's what the black and red plastic straws are about. And moving on around here to the other end of the staging yard, and this was the first end that I completed. And just to pan back here to show you the complete staging yard, or much of it, you can see that's a pretty good sized operation. So this was the grand tour of the staging yard. Okay, we've had that little tour of the staging yard, and now I want to talk a bit about how this all came together. Several things had to happen. First of all, had to get everything about the staging yard. The geometry is all determined by this particular 8-foot section right in here. This had to go in at exactly a known dimension from this wall and from that wall, because all the rest of the staging yard, the geometry is based on this as the registration piece. So the throat that I initially completed, that I did the episode on several episodes back, is over there. The new throat is over there. There's a curved section here. It makes a 90-degree curve where it takes 9 tracks around the curve. The minimum radius on the innermost track is 30 inches. And I'll talk a little bit about how that all went together. But to do all this, I had to actually get ahead on some other steps so I could be ready to do those things. And that's what I want to talk about now. And there's a series of graphics I'm going to put up as I talk through this, and I'll explain to you what it is you're looking at. The principal thing I had to do before I started putting the sections of the staging yard down is I had to run the power bus wires for the digital command control. And because I'm going to do selective power bus routing for each of the 9 staging yard tracks to only activate the tracks where I've got switches aligned, as I explained in a previous episode, there were 9 power buses that had to go down. And there were some other issues with digital command control that you have to be careful about on the power buses. And in a lot of ways it simplifies a model railroad operation, but there's things you gotta follow the rules. It's not like the old DC power packs or what we're used to. And one of those things is installing the power bus wires. I'm using AWG 14 stranded wire for the power bus, the main power bus wires to the track. That's what's recommended for runs of up to 50 feet from the base station, 30 to 50 feet depending on who you read. And the feeder wires that go to each section of track are AWG 18, and they're solid. And that's one of the things I'm going to start doing after I finish this episode. I've got to start wiring in all the feeder wires. And then once I do that, then I'm going to have to start learning how to actually do digital command control. So this is going to be a real learning experience, and I hope in a couple of weeks I'll be able to actually show you train running or equipment running on digital command control, but only in the staging yard because I still have mainline track to do. So with that, let's look at these graphics. The first graphic I'm showing you is this is how I actually make the power bus cables. You'll see those two reels there suspended on a roller. One contains red and the other black AWG 14 stranded, what's called TFN, which is standard Teflon coated wire. And I take these reels and I put them at the start of where I'm going to run the power bus. As you can see, they're located up at the end of the staging yard behind me. And I pull the wires out and I secure them with, I pull out enough length and I secure them with staples at the end. So I hold them down so that they won't twist, because I've got to twist them. So that's the second graphic right there, shows the wires secured with staples. And then what I do is I take the staples and I run the wires through the wire staples that you see in this graphic. If you remember, I talked about the wire stapler with the special wire staples in it. Well, I put the staples down where I want the wires to go, and you can see they easily fit through it in thread. And you'll notice on the left there's a wire that's some wires that have already been twisted. Then there's a pair of wires I've run that I haven't twisted yet, and then there's a staple ready for the next bit of wires that I run. The way I twist the wires is I chuck them into my Ryobi 3/8 inch variable speed reversible drill, battery powered drill. And the nice thing about this is, because it is variable speed, you can run it very slowly. You don't want to twist these wires really fast. Okay, I'm out at the full extent, clear around the corner and off to the corner of the basements, because I've got about 30 feet of wire I'm twisting. And remember, when you twist it, it will get shorter, so you have to walk towards it a little bit, otherwise you're going to have some real problems. Something's got to give. And so I slowly run the drill and twist the wire, and then holding the wire so it doesn't untwist on it, I unchuck it from the drill, and then I secure it at the end. As you can see here in this next graphic, I'm twisting that wire. I've twisted that wire in the drill, and then all the wires are run, twisted through the wire staples. And the next graphic, you can see them all laying out there, the power bus wires. You only need about 1 or 2 twists per running foot of wire. And it's not tightly twisted. You do this to avoid inductance problems with the digital command and control signal. And then you can see the next graphic is I've put in the risers that the railroad, the base is going to sit upon. You can see the twisted wires behind it. And by the way, at the far end of the wires, after I've twisted them, you also have to secure them. I just use a regular staple to hold them there, because they're not really hooked up to anything yet, but I want them to stay in place. And you can see in this next graphic that I'm leveling the risers. By the way, I'll go back here a second to that first graphic, or to refer back to it. You see a riser and a cleat indicated by the yellow arrow. And that's what the subgrade of the railroad is going to rest on. The key here, this is where you actually do your leveling. As you're working your way along and building all the bench work, you are leveling as best you can, but one of the advantages of L-girder framework for a railroad is that you can progressively level it, and it makes it a lot easier to level the finished product. So you can see I've got a 6-foot level here spanning across cleats that are going to hold this first section to the staging yard, and I'm making sure that I've got a good level area there. That's a 6-foot level that I bought through Amazon. I think it was like 19 bucks, not bad. Very handy tool. And so I've leveled the staging yard, and now to make sure that I get the staging yard in a proper position, these next couple graphics show my little laser distance measuring equipment. This was another Amazon purchase, not very much. I think it was like $15 or something. It makes it very, very handy to measure distances to very, very fine increments, and this will measure to fractions of a millimeter. I think it's down to a 50th of an inch, and I can position it on the piece that I'm trying to measure, or whatever I'm trying to place, and it'll fire the laser at the wall, and I can get this exactly right. So I know when this piece was secured that it was within 1/100th of an inch of its desired position from both walls and square to them. So that's the advantage of a very handy piece of equipment to have. Again, not very expensive. And you can see here, this next graphic, the cleat with the base, sub-base sitting on it. I've screwed it down to it. Now I'm not going to scenic the staging yard, so it's, you know, the way you see it right now is the way it's going to look. just track on bare sub roadbed, because this is the area where the offstage area of the layout, so to speak, like the backstage of a play. But you can see the roadbed 3/4 inch birch plywood topped with 1/2 inch homosote as a sub base. Makes a very good sub base, holds spikes very well, has good sound deadening properties. So it's a very good base for the staging yard. The next graphic shows that original yard throat that I built in place up against the original 8-foot section to make sure everything registers. So that throat was put in place, and son-in-law Kirk helped me lift it. It's not particularly heavy. One person can lift it, but positioning is a very delicate operation, because remember, I've got all those wires underneath there, and I really had to be careful I didn't pinch anything with the supporting cleat. So that was a two-person operation done in very slow speed to position it. And this next graphic, you can see the staging yard throat in place. There's no track on the staging yard body. The area that you're seeing now is track on it. It had no track on it, but I was making sure everything was leveled, and that's what I was doing, working my way around. And you can see I've placed other sections in this next graphic, other sections of the staging yard, using my square and level and making sure everything was nice and proper and level. And then this next graphic shows the staging yard base, sub base, built up to the point where the other yard throat is going to go in. And the next graphic, you can see I've got that yard throat on my work sawhorses, and the homosote I've glued to the plywood, and I have those clamps around it waiting for the glue to set up and to get to work on the track. And I built this other throat in much the same manner I built the first one. So I'm not going to go back over all that again, except to say I was a lot more organized with my wiring this time around. I learned a lot the last time, so if you look underneath this section of this staging yard throat, you notice things are a lot more organized and together, and it's a live and learn kind of thing, and I learned some things to do. Among others, the control panel for this one I had planned to make in the same manner as I made the first control panel, of plexiglass. But I learned a lesson about drilling in plexiglass, and it's not the easiest stuff to drill in, and I got a little bit overzealous and cracked it in half, and that didn't work too well. So, and being as it was weekend, I wasn't able to get to the hardware store to get more plexiglass. I decided I'll just use some masonite and cut it to shape. So the masonite is the control panel on the other yard throat. It looks the same if you were to look at it, or mostly the same. It came out pretty good, but it is masonite, it's not plexiglass, and but it'll serve the purpose. I meant to take a photograph of the underside of this second staging yard throat to show the greater organization to it. However, for some reason I got sidetracked, and when I went through all the images I'd taken after I had already placed it on the layout and secured it down, I realized that I had omitted taking one on the underside, and a good friend of mine, Chris Ben, recommended I do that. But sorry, Chris, but sometime if you want, you can come over from the UK and look underneath yourself, and you can see what it looks like. So with all that done and in place, then I started to draw the center lines for the track on the staging yard sub road bed, because I was going to mount the track right to the sub road bed. And that's a very painstaking, slow process. I had defined my track centers, the center lines, and laid that all out using a very fine pointed pencil, and the track is all laid to those center lines. And you can see in this graphic I'm using the long straight edge of the 6-foot level, and my carpenter's T-square, and a 2-foot level, and my combination square, and there's my fine point drafting pencil. Again, this is a process of just being careful and taking time and double and triple checking measurements. It allowed me to get this all set up, and you can see I'm taking, in the next graphic, I'm taking these center lines around a curve. Now, here was a particular problem that I had to encounter. As I mentioned, the minimum radius for the curve, the inside curve on the staging yard, is 30 inches. But the edge of the roadbed is less than 30 inches from the wall on either side. So how do you draw a radius when you can't actually have a center point you can get to? Well, it was simple enough. I drew construction lines out, straight lines, carried the first staging yard center line track, the outside track staging yard of the staging yard, to intersect on the curved portion of the railroad, of the staging yard, and measured back from that 30 inches, realizing that a curve of 30-inch radius would span 30 inches back from the intersect on both axes of those lines. So that gave me my starting points of the radius. And then, because I want to do what's called an easement curve, and this is a key point, something to mention, railroads and roads, when they go into curves, use something called a spiral easement. You don't go from the tangent, which is the straight, immediately to the radius of the curve. You wouldn't be able to handle it. Trains wouldn't be able to handle it. You wouldn't be able to drive on the highway very safely with it. So what engineers use is what's called a spiral easement. So you actually start into the curve on a theoretically infinite radius over a short stretch that closes down to the desired final radius. So I set back 8 inches further to determine the point where I wanted to start the spiral easement. Then I set the actual radius point for the final radius about a ½ inch in from the center lines on each side. So how did I achieve this spiral easement? Well, that's what you see on the next graphic. You can see there with the bricks I used to stabilize it and the clamps and the graphic following that. And what I use is a strip of masonite about 3/4 of an inch thick and 8 feet long, realizing that it's a perfect way to create an easement because you can towards the end of the curve, as you bend it, it will form a natural easement, almost like a catenary arch. And that's what I've done there, because I've aligned the bricks to the center line, right on the center line, at the point where I want the easement to start, and then lined up the spline, as we call it, which is the strip of masonite, to the true circular radius. And the distance between that true circular radius and the end point, about 8 inches, just let the masonite form its natural flowing easement. And as you look at the curves, or refer back to look at the curves on the tour of the staging yard, you'll notice that they all did form nice, smooth spiral easements. So the equipment tracks a lot better and it looks a lot more realistic. Now on the exterior, the outside portion, the mainline portion of the railroad, the portion everybody will see, there I would also like to experiment working with creating super elevation on curves, which not only we use spiral easements, but also the outside rail or the outside of a road around a curve is raised higher than the inside to balance the centrifugal forces on the equipment, and real railroads do this. It's not a huge amount of super elevation, but it's just enough to be noticeable, and it does add to the realism. So that set the center line for the first curve around the bend in the staging yard. The question was, how do I maintain proper track spacing for each track further out from that, as I go from the innermost curve, and maintain proper track spacing and also achieve the proper radius, because if I maintain the spacing, I will automatically maintain the desired radius of each successive curve. Well, I thought about that and I came up with a little gizmo that I'm showing in this next graphic, which was basically, I wanted the center lines 2½ inches apart, and that's a fairly wide spacing, but for a staging yard you want to be able to reach into the equipment. And it was simple enough to do. Basically I set up basically a cord across the radius that you can see on that horizontal piece, and mark the center point of it, and use that to establish the positioning of a 2½ inch piece of plastic that I cut to hold down with those push pins. As you can see, I've got it squared to the cord by my little hobby square there, and the bottom end is aligned with the innermost curve, and I use the top end to basically determine where the next center line would be. And using this practice, I basically set out a lot of these, as you see in this graphic. I set out a number of these going around the curve. As you can see on this next graphic with the flash picture, there's a series of them. So when it came to time to determine the center line for the next curve, working my way out, increasing the radius, I automatically had a beautiful spline curve that maintained exactly proper spacing from the track next in from it all the way out to the final curve on the staging yard. So it worked pretty slick, and actually once I got the hang of it, I was able to go through it pretty quickly. And you can see here in this next graphic the result. You can see the push pins, you can see the center line of the innermost curve, and then I've established the center line of the next curve in and worked my way through the curve. And with that, then I got to actually laying the track around the curb. And I had the additional idea that I used the spline to also give myself an edge reference for the cross ties, which made it even easier to align the track center line to the true center line on the drawing. And that's what you see me doing with the spline with the bricks in that photo. Then at one point, after I got the track down, all the track down, I noticed that there was a little bit of a problem. And that was on the end of the staging yard at the 8-foot piece with the first yard throat that I put in, and there was a little bit of a very short section of about a 2% grade because the plywood had gotten a little bit of a warp to it. And I was pondering how to fix that, because that little dip right there in a very short distance could cause problems with the couplers on cars and running. So I pondered that for a couple of days, and then I came up with my own idea of a corkscrew jack stand. And I got a couple scraps of wood, and as you can see in this graphic, I drilled a hole in it, set a nut in the top, and a wider countersunk hole. And the hole was just a little bit wider than this 1/4-inch carriage bolt, 3-inch carriage bolt. And then on the top of the carriage bolt, I epoxied a nice big metal washer, and I cut out two little squares of masonite. I made 2 of these. And at the point where I wanted to lift the plywood to correct the dip, I positioned them under the benchwork, and you can see in this next graphic, there's the jack stand there. And essentially just used my open-end wrench to tighten the screw, or extend the screw underneath and push up on the underside of the plywood. And it worked out like a charm. It allowed me to level it and take out that grate. So that's how I got to the position that we're at. And with that, we'll come back in to look at things. What I'm doing right now is I'm working on the start of running the feeder wires for the particular track sections down to the power bus wires. And I'm working on this end of the staging yard, and then once that's completed, I'll work on the other end, because I've got all those freight cars down there that I showed you on the grand tour. And I had the idea, one of the things you have to do with DCC, you have to maintain very clear specification on how your wiring goes in, because you've got a black wire and a red wire, and while it is not DC, you have to treat it as if it is, because you don't want to get these things crossed. And so I've established the rule on this layout is black in back. Way to remember it. So the black wire is always going to feed the rail furthest from the edge of the layout. So you can see it as black, red, black, red, black, red, alternating all across here. Now these straws, drilling the holes for the feeder wires, I wanted to have a way so I could be sure that both from above and below, I was working with a black wire for the particular track I was working for, because I didn't want to get this mixed up. That give you a lot of headaches. And I had the idea of getting some of these plastic stir sticks. Again, Amazon Prime. I got 1,000 of them of each kind for, I think it was $4. And the stir sticks are big enough inside and dimension that they will accommodate the number 18 solid track feeder wire. So on this section, I've drilled all my holes, and I've put the black and red straws in, made sure I got everything organized here, and got all the black wires going where the black wires are supposed to go, and the red wires going where the red wires are supposed to go. And I can feed the wire down through the straw to the underside and make the connection to the power bus wires. And I'll talk more about this when I talk about DCC, how the connection is made, and keep myself organized. And then once I've got the connection here, I can just pull the straw out, because it's wider than it's larger than the diameter of the wire, and that'll leave me the wire in place, and I'll just trim the end of the wire and strip it and solder it to the rail for track power supply for the DCC. And that's how I'm going to do the wiring, and I'll talk more about that next time. I don't want to get too far off in the staging yard. Some of the things that I found that make life a little bit easier in this, in laying the track, talking now about the staging yard again. This is a little something that I bought years ago. Again, this was Micromark, the company that sells stuff you don't seem to be able to get anywhere. And it's a track test card. Actually, it's just a clear sheet of acrylic plastic with provisions for mounting 2 trucks to it, 2 bogies for you European modelers. And what you do, what I like to do, is to find 2 of the most finicky bogie assemblies I can find that are prone to pick up any defect in the track and derail. Because if you can get this thing to roll through a section of track, you know, with proper care, your properly maintained equipment should easily roll through it. So this is finicky, they're wobbly, they will pick any defect. And essentially, once this has got a re-railer right here, and you may have noticed I put re-railer tracks at various points in the staging yard. It's a very handy thing to do. And essentially what it allows you to do is just push along, and you can, because it is clear, you can look down through it. If you spot a problem, if it derails somewhere, you can go back and you can look at it, roll it slowly over there, and see what the truck may be picking up on, what is hitting, what is causing the car to derail. So it's a very, very handy tool to have. Another handy tool that I didn't really buy I think I got it for Christmas one year, years ago, that is coming in very handy, is this is a Sears Craftsman, and it's a digital laser level. It's got spirit levels in here, bubble levels, but it's also got internal MEMS that read angle, and you can read it out in percent of grade, rise over distance for sheer measurement, or you can use it in angle. And it's also got a bore-sighted laser to the level, so you can extend the level line with that laser as far as you want, as far as you can get the laser to shine. And it will be exactly bore-sighted with what the level is reading. So if you want to go up a 1% grade, you can keep adjusting things until it reads out 1%, and then you just shoot your laser out there, and you can carry that 1% grade however you want. This was very handy for finding gradients in the staging yard and making sure I got things as level as possible. And it's going to come in very handy for putting in the mainline trackage too, where there are going to be grades. As far as the expense of this, I don't know. I don't think it was all that expensive. Sears Craftsman, it was probably 30 bucks or so, but it's a very handy piece of equipment. Again, one of the other handy things, I'm a big Ryobi power tool fan, 18 volt, cordless, but this is a handy little device. It's a right angle drill, and when you're working up here, having a drill like this where you can drill through, very, very, very handy. And again, it works well for all kinds of uses besides just the railroad, and I've used it for all kinds of projects for the last 10 years or so. And finally, this is similar to what I did for the arrangement for rolling out and making the power bus wires, but this is my little stand for the track feeder, and I can carry this to wherever I want. And you can see there's 2 500-foot rolls of red and black AWG 18 solid TFN wire that I'm going to use for my track feeders. And all I have to do is just, here's the black, and I'll just take it through here and put it in the straw and run it down through, and it pops out the bottom. And it's all through the benchwork and all ready to connect. Basically, I'll bring it back up through another black connection, so that way I'll make a double-ended connection down at the power bus. So a very, very handy thing to do. So that's the staging yard. I'm really happy with the progress. Again, it's a little delayed. A couple other little things to note here. You may notice the video quality is substantially improved. I've got a new video camera. I did not realize that what was considered high definition on the camera I was using would not anywhere near pass muster for high definition for a video, and now hopefully this will be coming to you in 1080p. So this should look much better, and you should be able to see things fine. I really would like your comments on that. So until next time, and I'll be working on this, and then the next time we'll talk about digital command control in maybe 2-3 weeks. So look forward to that. See you then. Bye.